looking at the history of the Chicago police, primarily up to 1970. What are the big takeaways from your research that you can share with people to understand the way that current police forces operate and their relationship with Black people, Black property, Black communities?
I think that the first one that people should be thinking about is that the fundamental premise that the police exist and the police were brought into existence to, like, quote unquote protect us or keep us safe, that's a myth. The police in Chicago and elsewhere were first put into place in order to protect capital and to protect racial hierarchies. And so when we think about the ways in which police forces currently operate, if we know that as the founding story of police, I think that the way that they operate makes a whole lot more sense, because they're essentially continuing to do now what they were founded to do, which is to protect capital and to protect racial hierarchy. The second big takeaway that I would say is that, when we think about the problems of policing and why policing doesn't work, at least doesn't work how people like to think it does, when we look at how Black communities like Chicago's experience policing, it's a two-sided story. So on the one hand, it's a story of being over-policed, so of being subject to, constant harassment, constant surveillance, constant violence, including torture. All of that happens while at the same time, Black communities do not actually experience much in the way of supposed public safety. So when we think about, communities that are the most subject to intracommunal violence, the communities that are the least safe, they're also the communities that are the most over-policed. And so it raises the question of what's the point? People like Trump and others enjoy looking at Chicago's gun violence and saying, well, look at that gun violence. This is why we need police.
Chicago's an example. It's like worse than Afghanistan. It's worse than, I shouldn't say because they're working with us, Honduras, Guatemala.
But actually, when we look at Chicago's gun violence and the long history of it, the fact that the Chicago Police Department almost never is able to arrest people who commit homicides. The clearance rate for homicides in Chicago is below 20%. Really what the story is that policing doesn't work. If this gun violence is so relentless and so untethered to actual police presences, it's actually a total refutation of the idea that policing works. I think it's important to understand that we are part of a long lineage of people who have struggled with and, rejected the legitimacy of police power as it exists and as it is visited upon communities of color in the United States, that people who are out in the streets right now calling for defunding and abolition, or people who are contributing to, financially to those causes and things like that, it's part of a tradition of protest against police violence that, has been going on for longer than any of us have been alive.
Simon Balto, thank you so much for being with us here on Intercepted.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. It's been a pleasure.
Simon Balto is author of the new book, Occupied Territory: Policing Black Chicago from Red Summer to Black Power. It's published by the University of North Carolina Press. He is also an assistant professor of history and African American studies at the University of Iowa. You can find him on Twitter at Simon Balto.